They called me the college dropout who couldn't stick to anything, but that day when General Morrison stepped out of the Black Hawk and saluted me in front of my entire family, everything they thought they knew about me shattered. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across my parents' backyard where we had gathered for my cousin's graduation party, and I was sitting at the picnic table picking at my potato salad, listening to the familiar chorus of disappointment that seemed to follow me to every family gathering. The smell of barbecue smoke drifted through the air, mixing with the sound of my siblings' laughter as they shared stories of their latest promotions and achievements. I had learned long ago to let their words wash over me like background noise, nodding at the appropriate moments while my mind was elsewhere, always elsewhere. The white tent my mother had rented flapped gently in the spring breeze, creating a peaceful backdrop for what would become the most shocking moment of all our lives. Little did they know that in less than 2 hours, the sound of rotor blades would cut through their conversations and change everything forever. My phone buzzed against my leg, and I glanced down to see a message that made my pulse quicken, though I kept my expression neutral as I had been trained to do. The cherry blossoms on my mother's prized tree were in full bloom, their delicate petals occasionally drifting down to land on the checkered tablecloth where my family sat judging my life choices. I took a sip of my lemonade and prepared myself for what was coming, knowing that some secrets are too big to stay buried forever. Before I share this story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say listening in the comments or let me know where you are tuning in from. I love seeing how far this reaches and knowing that my story might touch someone who needs to hear it. My sister Emma was in the middle of describing her latest court victory when she noticed me checking my phone again. She rolled her eyes and made that clicking sound with her tongue that she had perfected since we were kids, the one that always made me feel like I was 12 years old and in trouble for something I didn't understand. Emma was the golden child, the Harvard law graduate who had never met a case she couldn't win or a room she couldn't command with her presence. She wore her success like armor, and she wielded it like a weapon whenever I was around. My brother Jake looked up from his conversation with our uncle about his new position at the tech startup, his eyes narrowing as he watched me slip my phone back into my pocket. Jake had always been the creative one, the entrepreneur who could turn any idea into gold, and he had never missed an opportunity to remind me that I couldn't even finish a college degree. Our parents beamed when they talked about Emma's partnership track at her firm and Jake's innovative app that was revolutionizing something I pretended to understand. When the conversation turned to me, their smiles became strained, their voices took on that careful tone people use when they are trying to be supportive, but are actually deeply disappointed. My father cleared his throat the way he always did when he was about to deliver what he thought was helpful advice. He meant well, I knew that, but his words always felt like small cuts that accumulated over time until I felt like I was bleeding from 1,000 tiny wounds. He started talking about community college programs and trade schools, speaking slowly and deliberately as if I might not understand complex concepts. My mother nodded along, her wedding ring catching the sunlight as she gestured toward my cousin who had just graduated with honors from her nursing program. They spoke about me as if I wasn't sitting right there, discussing my future in the third person while I sat 3 feet away. Emma leaned forward with that concerned expression she had mastered in law school, the one that said she was about to solve all my problems with her superior intellect and life experience. She started listing internship opportunities at her firm, entry-level positions that she could probably secure for me if I would just apply myself and stop being so scattered. Jake joined in with suggestions about coding bootcamps and online certifications, his voice taking on that patient tone that made it clear he thought I was incapable of figuring anything out on my own. The worst part was that I had learned to play the role they had assigned me. I nodded and thanked them for their advice, my voice quiet and grateful in all the right places. I had become an expert at being the family disappointment, the one who needed guidance and couldn't quite get her life together. Over the years, I had perfected the art of deflecting their questions about my whereabouts and my mysterious jobs that never seemed to last very long. When they asked where I had been for the past 6 months, I would mumble something about traveling and finding myself, watching their faces tighten with frustration and concern. When they questioned my frequent moves and my reluctance to settle down anywhere, I would talk about needing to explore my options and figure out what I wanted to do with my life. They had no idea that my absences weren't about running away from responsibility, but about running toward the most important work I had ever done. They couldn't know that my frequent relocations weren't about restlessness, but about serving my country in ways they couldn't imagine. My phone buzzed again, and this time the message made me straighten slightly in my chair, though I was careful not to let my family notice the change in my posture. The coded words on my screen told me that the situation I had been monitoring for weeks was about to reach its conclusion, and my role in recent operations was about to be acknowledged in a way that would shatter my carefully maintained cover. I glanced around the table at my family, still deep in their discussions about my future, and felt a familiar tightness in my chest. For 5 years, I had carried the weight of their disappointment alongside the weight of classified information that I could never share. I had endured their gentle suggestions and not-so-gentle criticism while knowing that I had been serving at a level they couldn't comprehend, making decisions that affected national security while they worried about whether I would ever find a stable job. My cousin Sarah was showing off her new nursing pin when she noticed my expression. Sarah had always been kind to me, even when the rest of the family was losing patience with my supposed lack of direction. She asked if I was feeling all right, her voice gentle and genuinely concerned. I managed a smile and told her I was just thinking about some things, which wasn't exactly a lie. I was thinking about the operation that had concluded just 3 weeks ago, the one where my team had successfully extracted critical intelligence that would prevent an attack on American soil. I was thinking about the commendation letter that was sitting in a classified file somewhere, written by people whose names I couldn't mention to describe actions I couldn't discuss. I was thinking about the men and women who had trusted me with their lives and how proud I was to have earned that trust through years of training and service. Emma was still talking about networking opportunities when my Uncle Bob asked the question that always made my stomach clench. He wanted to know what exactly I had been doing for the past year, his voice carrying that edge that suggested he suspected I had been wasting time and probably money too. My uncle had never liked mysteries, and my vague explanations about freelance work and temporary positions had always irritated him. He leaned back in his lawn chair and crossed his arms, clearly preparing to deliver one of his lectures about responsibility and the real world. Bob had worked the same job for 30 years and couldn't understand why anyone would choose uncertainty over stability. He started talking about his friend's daughter who had just gotten a good government job with excellent benefits, speaking about it as if it was the pinnacle of achievement and exactly what I needed to straighten out my life. My mother jumped in to support Bob's point, her voice taking on that worried tone that made me feel guilty for causing her so much concern. She talked about health insurance and retirement planning, practical considerations that proved I wasn't taking my future seriously. She mentioned my college fund that had been spent on a degree I never finished, her voice carrying just enough reproach to remind me that I had disappointed them even in my failures. My father nodded along, adding comments about the importance of commitment and follow-through, character traits he clearly believed I lacked. The conversation continued around me while I sat quietly, my fingers wrapped around my lemonade glass, feeling the condensation cool against my skin while my family dissected my life and found it wanting. Jake tried to lighten the mood by making a joke about how I was keeping my options open, but even his humor carried an undercurrent of frustration with my choices. He loved me, I knew that, but he also found me embarrassing in a way that he tried to hide behind brotherly teasing. When his friends asked about his family, he would talk proudly about Emma's legal career and then change the subject when it came to me. I had overheard him once, telling someone that his sister was still figuring things out, his voice carrying just enough dismissal to make it clear that he didn't expect me to figure out anything significant. The words had stung more than I expected, partly because I wanted so badly to tell him about the things I had accomplished, the problems I had solved, the people I had helped bring home safely. My grandmother, who had been quiet through most of the conversation, suddenly reached over and patted my hand with her soft, wrinkled fingers. Grandma Rose had always been my defender, the one person in the family who never seemed disappointed in me even when I couldn't explain where I had been or what I was doing. She told me that some people just took longer to find their path, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had lived through enough decades to understand that life rarely follows the timeline we expect. Her words were meant to be comforting, but they also reinforced the family narrative that I was lost and struggling to find my way. Even my biggest supporters saw me as someone who needed time and patience to become the person I was supposed to be. The afternoon was getting warmer, and my mother started talking about moving the party inside where the air conditioning could keep everyone comfortable. The logistics of relocating cake and presents became the new focus of conversation, giving me a brief reprieve from being the center of concerned attention. I helped carry plates and glasses, grateful for the distraction and the opportunity to move around instead of sitting still under their worried gazes. My cousin's graduation cake was beautiful, decorated with nursing symbols and congratulations messages, a tangible representation of achievement and success that seemed to highlight my own apparent lack of accomplishment. As I carried the cake to the kitchen counter, I caught sight of my reflection in the window and wondered what my family would see if they could look at me the way my commanding officers did. Emma followed me into the kitchen, clearly intending to continue our earlier conversation in private. She leaned against the counter and crossed her arms, her lawyer expression firmly in place as she prepared to make her case for why I needed to get my life together. She started talking about wasted potential and missed opportunities, her voice taking on that patient tone she used with particularly difficult clients. Emma genuinely believed she was helping me, but her help always felt like judgment wrapped in good intentions. She talked about the importance of building a career and establishing stability, concepts that she assumed I didn't understand because I had never demonstrated them in ways she could recognize. When she offered to make some calls on my behalf, to use her connections to open doors for me, I felt that familiar mixture of gratitude and frustration that came from being loved by someone who couldn't see who I really was. I thanked Emma for her concern and her offer to help, keeping my voice warm and appreciative even though her words felt like sand in an open wound. I had become an expert at accepting their help gracefully, while knowing that the kind of help I actually needed was something they couldn't provide. They couldn't help me process the weight of command decisions or the isolation that came from living a double life. They couldn't understand the pride I felt in work I could never discuss or the satisfaction that came from serving something bigger than myself. When Emma hugged me and told me that everything would work out if I just focused and committed to something, I hugged her back and wondered what she would think if she knew that I had been focused and committed for years, just not in ways she could see. We rejoined the family outside just as my father was starting his traditional speech about the importance of education and hard work. Dad had given variations of this speech at every family gathering for as long as I could remember, and it always seemed to be aimed at me even when the occasion was supposed to be celebrating someone else. He talked about the opportunities available to young people who were willing to apply themselves, his eyes finding mine across the circle of lawn chairs as he emphasized the word willing. My father was a good man who had worked hard to provide for his family, and he couldn't understand why his youngest daughter seemed incapable of following the path he had laid out so clearly. His speeches always ended with encouragement about it never being too late to turn things around, words that were meant to inspire but always made me feel like a reclamation project that required constant attention and intervention. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, casting longer shadows across the backyard as the afternoon moved toward evening. My phone had been quiet for almost an hour, which usually meant that whatever was coming was significant enough to require radio silence until the last possible moment. I found myself listening for sounds that my family wouldn't recognize, my training making me aware of aircraft patterns and communication signals that were invisible to civilian ears. The neighborhood was peaceful, filled with the ordinary sounds of suburban life that provided perfect camouflage for extraordinary events. Children were playing in nearby yards, and someone was mowing their lawn 2 houses over, creating a soundtrack of normalcy that would soon be interrupted in ways my family couldn't possibly anticipate. My cousin was opening her graduation presents when my phone vibrated once, sharply, against my leg. I didn't need to look at it to know what the single buzz meant, a communication protocol that had been drilled into me during months of training until it became as natural as breathing. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral as I watched Sarah unwrap a stethoscope from our aunt and uncle. The gift was practical and thoughtful, exactly the kind of present that celebrated achievement and pointed toward a bright future. I applauded with everyone else, my hands moving automatically while my mind shifted into a different mode, preparing for what was about to unfold. The transition felt like stepping through an invisible doorway from one version of myself to another, from the disappointing daughter to the person I had trained for years to become. My mother was suggesting that we all pose for pictures when I heard it, a sound so faint that I was probably the only one who noticed. The distant whir of rotor blades, still far enough away to be mistaken for traffic or construction noise, but unmistakable to someone who had spent countless hours around military aircraft. I glanced toward the western horizon, my eyes automatically scanning for movement while maintaining the appearance of casual interest in the family photo session. My training kicked in without conscious thought, my body language remaining relaxed while my awareness expanded to take in every detail of our surroundings. The sound was getting closer, which meant that in a matter of minutes, my two worlds were about to collide in the most dramatic way possible. Emma was arranging people for the picture when she noticed me looking toward the sky. She followed my gaze and asked if I was expecting rain, her voice carrying just a hint of the impatience she felt whenever I seemed distracted during family events. I told her I thought I heard a helicopter, which was true enough, though I didn't mention that I knew exactly what kind of helicopter it was and why it was heading in our direction. The sound was becoming more distinct now, the characteristic deep thrum of heavy military rotors that cut through the air with unmistakable authority. My family was still focused on their photo arrangements, completely unaware that their peaceful suburban afternoon was about to be transformed into something none of them would ever forget. The noise was loud enough now that everyone could hear it, and heads began turning toward the sound with the casual curiosity of people who lived far from military bases and rarely saw aircraft that weren't commercial flights heading to the nearby airport. My Uncle Bob made a joke about the National Guard probably doing training exercises, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who had never had reason to think that military helicopters might have any connection to his own life. Jake started speculating about whether it might be a medical evacuation, his tone suggesting that even that possibility seemed remote and unrelated to their suburban reality. I remained quiet, knowing that in less than 5 minutes, all their casual speculation would be replaced by shock and confusion that would reshape how they saw me forever. The sound was unmistakable now, the deep rhythmic beating of rotor blades that seemed to be heading directly toward our neighborhood. My mother shaded her eyes with her hand and looked up at the sky, her expression shifting from mild curiosity to something approaching concern as the sound grew louder and more immediate. She asked if anyone knew why military helicopters would be flying over a residential area, her voice taking on that worried tone that appeared whenever anything disrupted her carefully planned family gatherings. My father suggested they might be heading to the hospital, but even he seemed uncertain as the sound continued to grow more intense and directional. I felt my heart rate increase, not from fear but from the anticipation of finally being able to stop pretending to be someone I wasn't. The helicopters were close enough now that we could see them approaching from the west, their dark shapes becoming visible against the afternoon sky like something out of a movie that had suddenly invaded our quiet suburban reality. There were 2 of them, flying in formation with the precision that marked them unmistakably as military aircraft on an official mission. My family stood frozen in their photo poses, their faces turned upward with expressions of bewilderment and growing alarm as the helicopters approached our street with obvious intention. The sound was overwhelming now, drowning out conversation and making it clear that whatever was happening was serious, official, and heading directly toward us. My phone buzzed again, and this time I pulled it out and read the message that confirmed what I already knew. The helicopters were looking for me, and in less than 2 minutes, everything my family believed about my life was going to change forever. I stood up from my chair and walked toward the center of the backyard, positioning myself where I could be clearly seen from the air. My family watched me with confusion and growing alarm, their faces reflecting the beginning recognition that somehow, impossibly, this military arrival was connected to their disappointing daughter who couldn't seem to get her life together. The lead helicopter was circling our house now, obviously preparing to land in the large open space behind our property where my father had always planned to build a workshop but never quite found the time. The downdraft from the rotors was starting to affect the party decorations, sending napkins flying and making the tablecloth snap and flutter like a flag in a windstorm. My mother was calling my name, asking what was happening, but her voice was nearly lost in the overwhelming noise of the approaching aircraft. I turned to look at my family one last time before everything changed, seeing their faces filled with confusion and the beginning of something that looked like recognition that their ordinary afternoon had become something extraordinary, and that somehow I was at the center of it all. The first Black Hawk touched down in the field behind our house with military precision, its landing creating a whirlwind of dust and debris that sent my cousin's graduation decorations flying across the yard like confetti in a tornado. My family huddled together near the patio, their faces masks of shock and disbelief as they watched uniformed personnel begin to disembark from the aircraft with the efficient movements of people accustomed to high-stakes operations. I stood apart from them, my posture unconsciously shifting into the bearing I had learned through years of training, my shoulders square and my spine straight as I prepared to bridge the gap between the two lives I had been living. The second helicopter maintained its position in a holding pattern overhead, a clear indication that this was an official visit with full military protocol, not some random training exercise that had accidentally wandered into suburban airspace. Emma was shouting something at me, her lawyer's voice trying to cut through the noise as she demanded to know what was happening. But her words were swallowed by the overwhelming sound of rotor blades and the sudden appearance of armed security personnel taking positions around the perimeter of our property. The memories came flooding back as I watched the familiar choreography of a military operation unfolding in my parents' backyard. Memories of the day 5 years ago when a recruiter had approached me during my sophomore year of college and offered me an opportunity that would change everything about who I was and what I could become. I had been studying international relations with a focus on Middle Eastern politics, my professors impressed by my analytical abilities and my intuitive understanding of complex geopolitical situations. The recruiter had been watching me for months, evaluating my academic performance, my physical fitness, my psychological profile, and my potential for handling classified information under extreme pressure. When she finally approached me in the campus coffee shop where I spent most of my afternoons studying, she spoke in careful code about opportunities for advanced study and specialized training that few people my age would ever be offered. The conversation had lasted less than 10 minutes, but it had set in motion a series of events that would lead me away from the conventional path my family expected me to follow and into a world of service that I could never fully explain to the people I loved most. The training had begun immediately after I completed my sophomore year, though my family believed I was taking a summer internship in Washington that would help me figure out what I wanted to do with my degree. The reality was far more intense and transformative than any internship could have been, months of physical conditioning that pushed my body beyond limits I didn't know existed, followed by psychological training that taught me to compartmentalize information and maintain cover identities under circumstances that would break most people. I learned to speak 3 languages fluently, to navigate complex political situations with cultural sensitivity, and to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. My instructors were impressed by my natural aptitude for strategic thinking and my ability to remain calm under pressure, qualities that would eventually lead to assignments that carried levels of responsibility I could never have imagined as a college student worried about term papers and final exams. By my junior year, I was no longer really a student in any conventional sense, though I maintained the appearance of pursuing my degree while actually serving on missions that took me to places my family couldn't pronounce and situations they couldn't imagine. When I told them I was studying abroad, I was actually providing intelligence support for operations in regions where American interests were threatened by forces that wanted to harm our nation and our allies. When I claimed to be working on independent research projects, I was analyzing terrorist communications and helping to prevent attacks that would have killed innocent people. The work was classified at levels that meant I could never discuss it with anyone outside my operational team, and the isolation of living a double life began to weigh on me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I wanted so badly to tell my family that I was serving my country with distinction, that I was making a difference in ways that mattered, but the security protocols that governed my life made such honesty impossible. The hardest part had been watching their disappointment grow as I failed to meet their expectations for what a successful college experience should look like. When I missed family gatherings because of deployments, they saw irresponsibility and poor priorities rather than duty and sacrifice. When I couldn't maintain steady relationships because of my frequent absences and inability to share important parts of my life, they worried that I was incapable of commitment and emotional maturity. My grades suffered because my real education was happening in classified briefing rooms and training facilities, not lecture halls and libraries, but I couldn't explain why my academic performance no longer reflected my actual capabilities and knowledge. Each semester brought new challenges as I tried to balance the demands of maintaining my cover identity with the increasing complexity of my actual responsibilities, all while watching my family's faith in my potential slowly erode. The operation that had concluded 3 weeks ago had been the culmination of 2 years of careful planning and intelligence gathering. A mission that required infiltrating a network of individuals who were planning to attack American infrastructure during the upcoming holiday season. My role had been to pose as a college student interested in international activism, using my legitimate academic background to gain access to groups that were using universities as recruiting grounds for anti-American activities. The work had been dangerous and psychologically demanding, requiring me to build relationships with people who wanted to harm my country while maintaining my cover and gathering the intelligence that would eventually lead to their capture. For 18 months, I had lived a triple life, pretending to be a directionless student to my family while pretending to be a sympathetic activist to my targets, while actually serving as a highly trained intelligence operative working to protect American lives. The breakthrough had come when I managed to gain access to communication channels that revealed the scope and timeline of the planned attacks. Working with a team of analysts and field operatives, I had helped to map the entire network and identify key players whose arrest would dismantle the organization before they could carry out their plans. The final phase of the operation had required me to disappear for 6 weeks, a period when my family believed I was having some kind of breakdown and possibly struggling with substance abuse issues based on my erratic communication and obvious stress. In reality, I had been working 18-hour days in a secure facility, coordinating with international partners and preparing for simultaneous raids that would need to happen with perfect timing to prevent any of the conspirators from escaping or accelerating their timeline. The raids had been successful beyond what anyone had dared to hope, resulting in the arrest of 37 individuals and the seizure of materials that would have caused devastating damage to transportation networks and energy infrastructure across 3 states. My intelligence work had been instrumental in identifying targets and predicting their movements, and my cultural knowledge had helped prevent diplomatic incidents during the international cooperation phases of the operation. When it was over, my commanding officers had recommended me for commendations that recognized not just my individual contribution, but my leadership in coordinating complex multi-agency efforts under extreme pressure. The recognition felt surreal after years of being seen as a failure by the people whose opinions mattered most to me. And I found myself wondering if my family would ever understand that their disappointing daughter had been serving at levels that most people would never achieve. General Morrison had been overseeing the operation from the beginning, his reputation as one of the military's most respected strategic minds, making his involvement a clear indication of how seriously the threat had been taken. I had briefed him personally on multiple occasions, my analysis and recommendations helping to shape the overall approach to dismantling the network. He had been impressed by my work, my ability to see patterns that others missed, and my skill at maintaining cover under circumstances that had compromised other operatives in the past. When the operation concluded successfully, he had specifically requested that I be considered for advanced assignments that would utilize my unique combination of academic knowledge, field experience, and analytical capabilities. The conversation had taken place in a secure conference room with no windows, but I could still remember the weight of his words when he told me that my service had potentially saved thousands of lives. The helicopter engines were winding down now, their overwhelming noise gradually decreasing to a level that would allow normal conversation. Though the presence of military personnel in full dress uniforms was creating a surreal atmosphere that made our suburban backyard feel like a movie set. My family remained clustered together near the house, their faces reflecting various stages of shock, confusion, and the beginning recognition that whatever was happening was both official and directly connected to me in ways they couldn't begin to understand. I could see my mother's lips moving as she tried to ask questions that no one could answer, her hands fluttering nervously as she looked back and forth between me and the military personnel who were now moving with the precise choreography of a formal ceremony. My father stood with his arm around her shoulders, his expression cycling through bewilderment, concern, and something that might have been the beginning of pride as he started to realize that this level of military attention suggested something significant about his daughter's life that he had never suspected. Emma had moved closer to the group of uniformed personnel, her legal training making her bold enough to demand explanations even in circumstances that were clearly beyond her experience or jurisdiction. I could see her trying to assert some kind of authority over the situation, her voice taking on that professional tone she used in courtrooms as she asked questions about warrants and jurisdiction and the legal basis for military operations on private property. The security personnel responded to her with the polite professionalism they had been trained to show to civilians, but their body language made it clear that they were following protocols that superseded local legal concerns. One of them stepped forward to explain that this was an official military ceremony recognizing service to the nation, his words careful and formal as he tried to provide information without revealing classified details about the nature of that service. Jake had his phone out and was clearly trying to record what was happening, his entrepreneurial instincts recognizing that whatever this was, it was unusual enough to be worth documenting. One of the security personnel noticed his filming and approached him with a polite but firm request to put the device away, explaining that operational security required that no recordings be made of military personnel or procedures. Jake complied immediately, his face flushing with embarrassment as he realized that he had inadvertently attempted to compromise some kind of sensitive operation. The interaction seemed to drive home for him that this was not entertainment or a random occurrence, but something serious and official that required respect for protocols he didn't understand. My cousin Sarah had moved to stand beside my grandmother, both of them watching me with expressions that suggested they were beginning to piece together clues they had never thought to connect before. Grandma Rose had always defended me when the rest of the family expressed frustration with my choices, and I could see in her eyes the recognition that her faith in me might have been more justified than anyone had realized. Sarah was studying my posture and bearing, probably noticing for the first time that I carried myself differently than the scattered college student they all believed me to be. My years of military training had given me habits and reflexes that were invisible to people who didn't know what to look for, but in this context, surrounded by uniformed personnel, those differences were becoming more apparent. The lead helicopter had shut down completely now, and I could see movement inside as personnel prepared to disembark for what was clearly going to be a formal ceremony of some kind. My pulse was steady despite the magnitude of what was about to happen, my training having taught me to remain calm in high-pressure situations even when the personal stakes were enormous. This moment represented the end of years of living a double life, the collision of my two worlds in a way that would force me to reconcile the person my family thought I was with the person I had actually become. There would be no going back to the comfortable fiction that I was a disappointment who couldn't get her life together. No more hiding behind the cover identity that had protected my work but damaged my relationships with the people I loved most. The door of the helicopter opened with mechanical precision, and I could see polished boots stepping onto the ground with the measured cadence of military ceremony. The figure emerging from the aircraft was unmistakably General Morrison, his uniform bearing the ribbons and insignia that marked him as one of the most decorated officers in the current military hierarchy. His presence here, in my parents' backyard, was a statement about the significance of whatever recognition was about to take place, a level of honor that most service members could only dream of receiving. I had briefed him dozens of times in secure facilities, but seeing him here in the context of my family life felt like watching two different movies spliced together into something that shouldn't be possible, but was definitely happening. Behind General Morrison came two other officers whose ranks and bearing indicated that this was not just a courtesy visit, but a formal military proceeding with multiple witnesses and official documentation. One of them carried a leather portfolio that probably contained orders and citations, while the other held himself with the rigid attention that suggested he was here to provide official testimony about events and service that had previously been classified beyond public recognition. The protocol was clearly established and rehearsed, a ceremony that honored service while respecting the security requirements that still governed much of what I had done in my years of classified work. My family was completely silent now, their earlier questions and confusion replaced by the recognition that they were witnessing something historically significant, an official military ceremony taking place in their backyard for reasons they couldn't begin to understand. My mother had stopped trying to ask questions and was simply staring at the proceedings with an expression that cycled between wonder and dawning realization that her daughter's life had dimensions she had never suspected. My father stood straighter, his own military bearing from his brief service decades ago, making him recognize the solemnity and importance of what was happening even if he couldn't understand why it was happening to me. The security perimeter had been quietly but efficiently established, with personnel positioned at key points around our property to ensure that the ceremony could proceed without interruption or observation from outside parties. Neighbors had begun to gather at the edges of their yards, their curiosity about the military presence creating an audience for what was about to become the most public recognition of my service that had ever been possible. The contrast between the suburban setting and the military formality was striking, creating a scene that would have seemed impossible just an hour ago when my biggest concern was enduring another family gathering where my life choices were politely criticized and my potential was sadly discussed. General Morrison was walking toward me now, his stride purposeful and dignified as he crossed the lawn that had been the site of countless family barbecues and birthday parties. His expression was serious, but not stern, carrying the gravity appropriate to a formal military ceremony while also conveying what looked like personal respect and perhaps even warmth toward someone whose service he had witnessed firsthand. Each step brought us closer to the moment when 5 years of secrecy would end and my family would finally understand who I had become while they thought I was failing to become anyone at all. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the yard, creating dramatic lighting that made the scene feel even more surreal and cinematic. Birds had stopped singing, perhaps disrupted by the earlier helicopter noise, leaving an unusual quiet that seemed to emphasize the significance of what was about to happen. Even the neighbor's dog had stopped barking, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath to witness an event that none of them had ever imagined would unfold in their quiet suburban community. I stood waiting, my training and bearing evident in ways my family was probably noticing for the first time, preparing to finally be seen for who I really was. General Morrison stopped 3 feet in front of me and came to attention, his bearing impeccable as he prepared to deliver what was clearly a formal recognition that had been planned and approved at the highest levels of military command. The silence that fell over our backyard was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the helicopter maintaining its overhead position and the sound of my family's collective intake of breath as they realized they were about to witness something that would change everything they thought they knew about me. My training took over completely now, my body responding automatically to the presence of a superior officer as I snapped to attention with precision that came from years of practice. My spine straight and my shoulders square in a way that probably shocked my family more than anything else that had happened so far. The transformation was visible and immediate, the scattered college student they knew disappearing completely to reveal the disciplined military officer I had become through years of service they had never suspected. The general's voice carried across the yard with the authority and clarity that had made him one of the most respected leaders in the military hierarchy, his words formal and official as he began to speak. He addressed me by my rank, Captain Martinez, the title falling like a thunderclap into the suburban quiet and causing my mother to actually step backward in shock as she heard her daughter called by a rank that suggested years of service and achievement she had never imagined. He spoke about Operation Silent Shield, using the declassified name for the mission that had occupied the last 2 years of my life, his words careful to honor my service, while respecting the security classifications that still governed many of the details. My family listened in stunned silence as he described a network of domestic terrorists whose plans to attack critical infrastructure had been disrupted through the intelligence work and undercover operations of a small team of specialists, their faces reflecting growing comprehension that their disappointing daughter had been serving her country at levels they couldn't have conceived. The general's voice grew warmer as he spoke about my specific contributions to the operation, describing analytical work that had identified patterns other investigators had missed and undercover assignments that had required maintaining complex cover identities for extended periods under dangerous circumstances. He talked about cultural expertise that had prevented diplomatic incidents during international cooperation phases of the mission, and strategic insights that had shaped the overall approach to dismantling the terrorist network. Each word seemed to land on my family like physical blows, their understanding of who I was being systematically demolished and rebuilt with information that painted a picture of service, sacrifice, and achievement that bore no resemblance to the person they thought they knew. Emma was shaking her head slightly, her legal mind struggling to process the cognitive dissonance between the evidence of her own experience and the authoritative testimony she was hearing from one of the nation's most senior military leaders. The citations began with a commendation for distinguished service in intelligence operations, the general's voice taking on the formal cadence reserved for official military ceremonies as he read from documents that represented recognition at the highest levels of government. He spoke about innovative analytical techniques that had accelerated the identification of terrorist cells and about courage under pressure that had enabled the successful completion of dangerous undercover assignments. My family stood frozen as they heard about leadership responsibilities that had included coordinating with federal agencies and international partners, work that required clearance levels most people never achieved and competencies that took years of specialized training to develop. The reality that their scattered daughter had been entrusted with national security responsibilities was clearly overwhelming for people who had spent years worrying about whether I could manage to complete a college degree. Jake was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before, his face cycling through confusion, amazement, and what looked like the beginning of profound respect as he tried to reconcile the person he thought he knew with the accomplished officer being honored by General Morrison. His entrepreneurial mind was probably calculating the level of achievement required to earn this kind of recognition, the years of training and service that would be necessary to reach the rank and responsibilities being described. Emma had tears running down her cheeks, her legal training making her understand better than the others exactly how significant this ceremony was and what it meant about the life I had been living while she worried about my future and offered to help me find entry-level positions at her firm. The second commendation was for exceptional performance in cross-cultural operations, recognition of work that had required me to navigate complex political situations while maintaining cover identities that protected both my safety and the security of ongoing missions. General Morrison spoke about linguistic abilities and cultural knowledge that had made critical differences in the success of international cooperation efforts, skills that had been developed through intensive training and refined through real-world applications in environments where mistakes could have catastrophic consequences. My parents were holding hands now, their faces reflecting the slow realization that their daughter's frequent absences and vague explanations about travel and temporary work had actually been covers for service that put her in danger while protecting American interests around the world. The final citation was for the Distinguished Service Medal, an honor that made my Uncle Bob actually step forward with an expression of shock and growing pride as he recognized an award that was reserved for extraordinary achievement in military service. General Morrison's voice carried genuine warmth as he spoke about courage, dedication, and sacrifice that had contributed directly to the prevention of terrorist attacks that would have killed innocent Americans and damaged critical infrastructure. He talked about the 18 months of undercover work that had culminated in the successful operation 3 weeks ago, describing the psychological demands of maintaining multiple identities while gathering intelligence that required constant risk assessment and split-second decision-making. Each word seemed to hit my family like a revelation, forcing them to completely reconstruct their understanding of who I was and what I had been doing while they thought I was wasting my potential and failing to find direction in my life. My grandmother was crying now, her weathered hands pressed to her mouth as she realized that her faith in me had been more justified than even she had dared to hope. Grandma Rose had always defended me when the rest of the family expressed frustration with my choices, and seeing her vindication written across her face felt almost as meaningful as the official recognition I was receiving from General Morrison. She had somehow sensed that there was more to my story than what I could share, and her unwavering support had been one of the few constants that had made the isolation of my double life bearable during the hardest periods of my service. The ceremony concluded with General Morrison pinning the Distinguished Service Medal to my uniform jacket, a piece of military dress that I had changed into after receiving the coded message that had warned me this moment was coming. The weight of the medal felt symbolic of more than just the specific operations it represented, carrying the accumulated significance of years of service that I had never been able to share with the people I loved most. When the general stepped back and rendered a crisp salute, I returned it with the precision that had been drilled into me through countless hours of training. And the moment felt like the bridge between my two worlds finally becoming solid enough to support the weight of truth. The applause started with my cousin Sarah, her nursing background making her understand better than most what dedication to service really meant, and quickly spread to the rest of my family as they struggled to process what they had just witnessed. My father was applauding with tears running down his cheeks, his own brief military service giving him some framework for understanding the significance of what had just happened even if he couldn't comprehend how his daughter had achieved such recognition without his knowledge. My mother was alternating between clapping and wiping her eyes, her face reflecting the complex mixture of pride, guilt, and bewilderment that came from realizing she had been worrying about a daughter who was actually serving her country with distinction. General Morrison turned to address my family directly, his voice warm and personal as he spoke about the sacrifice that military families make when their loved ones serve in classified operations. He acknowledged the difficulty of supporting someone whose work cannot be discussed or recognized publicly, and he thanked them for their unwitting contribution to national security through their patience with absences and unexplained commitments they couldn't understand. His words were clearly intended to help them process the revelation that their disappointing daughter had actually been serving at the highest levels while maintaining the cover that protected both her safety and the security of her missions. Emma was the first to approach me after the general finished speaking, her lawyer's composure completely abandoned as she threw her arms around me and whispered apologies for every doubt she had expressed and every piece of advice she had offered about getting my life together. She held me tightly, her body shaking as she tried to process the magnitude of what she had just learned about her little sister's real life. When she finally stepped back, she looked at me with an expression of awe and respect that I had never seen from her before, her understanding of achievement completely recalibrated by the recognition she had just witnessed. Jake was next, his approach more hesitant as he struggled to find words for a situation that his experience as an entrepreneur had never prepared him to handle. He started to speak several times before finally managing to tell me that he was proud of me, his voice breaking slightly as he realized how inadequate that simple phrase was for acknowledging what I had accomplished while he worried about my future prospects. He asked if I could ever forgive him for not seeing what was really happening, his question carrying the weight of years of subtle criticism and concern that now seemed completely misplaced. My parents approached together, their faces reflecting the complex emotional processing that comes with having fundamental assumptions challenged by undeniable evidence. My father's military background gave him some framework for understanding what I had achieved, but his parental love made it difficult for him to accept that his daughter had been in danger while he worried about her career prospects. My mother's reaction was more visceral, her maternal instincts making her simultaneously proud of my service and terrified by the risks I had taken, while she thought I was just struggling to find myself. They both hugged me, their embrace carrying years of accumulated worry transformed into belated understanding and pride. The neighbors who had gathered to watch the unusual military activity in our suburban street were clearly struggling to process what they had witnessed, their ordinary Saturday afternoon having become something that belonged in a movie rather than their quiet residential community. Several of them approached to congratulate me, their voices carrying the awkward respect that civilians often show to military personnel when they don't quite know how to acknowledge service they don't fully understand. Mrs. Henderson from next door, who had always been polite but slightly disapproving of my irregular schedule and frequent absences, was particularly effusive in her apologies for misunderstanding my situation. General Morrison and his staff began the process of departing, their mission accomplished and their protocol satisfied by the successful completion of a ceremony that had been planned to honor service, while respecting ongoing security requirements. Before leaving, the general spoke privately with my parents, explaining in general terms the nature of classified service and the ongoing restrictions that would continue to limit what I could share about specific operations and assignments. His words were clearly intended to help them understand that while they now knew about my service, much of what I did would necessarily remain private for security reasons that had nothing to do with trust or family relationships. As the military personnel prepared to leave and the helicopters began their startup procedures, my family gathered around me with expressions that reflected their ongoing struggle to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the accomplished officer they had just seen honored by one of the nation's senior military leaders. The sound of rotor blades spinning up created a dramatic backdrop for conversations that felt surreal after years of hiding such a fundamental part of who I had become. Emma asked if I was still in the military, her legal mind focusing on practical questions about my current status and future obligations, while Jake wanted to know if this meant I had actually graduated from college or if that had been part of my cover identity. My mother's questions were more emotional, focused on whether I had been in danger and whether I was safe now, her maternal concern overriding her curiosity about the details of my service. My father asked about my rank and how long I had been serving, his military experience giving him a framework for the questions that mattered most to understanding my career and achievements. I answered what I could while explaining that many aspects of my work remained classified, my family beginning to understand that even this revelation represented only a partial lifting of the secrecy that had governed my life for the past 5 years. The helicopters lifted off with the same precision that had marked their arrival, their departure creating another whirlwind of dust and debris that seemed to symbolize the way this afternoon had disrupted everything my family thought they knew about their lives. As the sound of rotor blades faded into the distance, we were left standing in a backyard that looked exactly the same as it had 2 hours ago, but felt completely transformed by what had happened here. The graduation decorations that had been scattered by the downdraft from the landing aircraft seemed somehow trivial now. Physical reminders of the ordinary celebration that had been interrupted by extraordinary recognition of service that none of us had seen coming. My cousin Sarah was the first to break the contemplative silence that followed the departure of the military personnel, her voice soft but clear as she told me that she finally understood why I had always seemed different, why I carried myself with a confidence that didn't match the scattered student persona I had maintained for my family. She said that in retrospect, the signs had been there for anyone who knew how to look, the physical fitness that seemed unusual for someone who supposedly spent all her time studying, the way I reacted to news reports about international incidents, the disciplined habits that contradicted my reputation for being disorganized and unfocused. The afternoon was moving toward evening now, the sun casting longer shadows across our backyard as we tried to process what had happened and what it meant for our family relationships going forward. My mother suggested that we go inside and continue our conversation over dinner, her hostess instincts making her want to create a comfortable environment for discussions that would help everyone understand this new reality. The graduation cake that had been the centerpiece of our celebration seemed almost forgotten now, overshadowed by revelations that made academic achievements feel small in comparison to the service and sacrifice that had been honored by the military ceremony we had just witnessed. As we gathered the scattered party supplies and prepared to move inside, my family's conversation reflected their ongoing struggle to understand how they had failed to recognize the signs of my real life and accomplishments. Emma was particularly hard on herself, her legal training making her feel that she should have been more observant and analytical about the inconsistencies in my story over the years. Jake was processing the business implications of what he had learned, his entrepreneurial mind calculating the leadership experience and security clearances that would make me valuable in ways he had never considered. My parents were focused on the emotional dimensions of the revelation, trying to understand how to support a daughter whose work they couldn't fully know or understand. The dinner conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever had as a family, marked by questions I could answer and questions I couldn't, by apologies for misunderstandings and expressions of pride that felt both overwhelming and healing after years of carrying the burden of their disappointment. My grandmother held my hand through most of the meal, her weathered fingers squeezing mine as she told me repeatedly how proud she was and how sorry she was that I had had to carry such secrets alone for so long. Her validation meant more to me than she could know, representing the bridge between the person I had been in their eyes and the person I had actually become through my service. As the evening progressed, my family began to ask more sophisticated questions about my career and my future, their initial shock giving way to curiosity about what my service meant for my long-term plans and whether I would continue in military work or transition to civilian applications of my skills and experience. I explained that much of my future remained uncertain, dependent on factors I couldn't discuss and opportunities that might or might not materialize based on ongoing operational needs and security considerations. What I could tell them was that I had found my calling in service to something larger than myself, and that the work I had been doing felt more meaningful and fulfilling than anything I had ever imagined possible when I was actually the confused college student they remembered. The transformation in our family dynamic was immediate and profound. Years of accumulated worry and disappointment replaced by pride and respect that felt both wonderful and slightly overwhelming after so long hiding such a fundamental part of who I was. Emma stopped offering career advice and started asking about leadership challenges and decision-making under pressure, her questions reflecting genuine interest in learning from someone whose experience she now recognized as far exceeding her own in many areas. Jake wanted to understand the analytical and strategic thinking skills I had developed, his entrepreneurial interests making him curious about applications of military training and experience in civilian contexts. My parents struggled most with the emotional dimensions of the revelation, their love and pride complicated by guilt about their years of misunderstanding and concern about dangers I had faced while they worried about entirely different things. My mother wanted to know if I had been lonely, carrying such secrets while maintaining relationships with family members who couldn't understand or support the most important aspects of my life. My father asked about the personal costs of classified service, his own military experience giving him insight into the sacrifices that came with duty and responsibility that civilian family members couldn't fully comprehend. As the evening wound down and family members began to prepare for departure, the hugs and goodbyes carried a weight and meaning that had been absent from our interactions for years. Emma held me longest, whispering that she was sorry for every time she had made me feel like a disappointment when I was actually serving with distinction in ways she couldn't have imagined. Jake promised to stop worrying about my future and to start trusting that I knew what I was doing, his voice carrying genuine respect for achievements he was only beginning to understand. My parents asked if we could have dinner again soon, their voices hopeful as they realized that our relationship could finally be built on truth rather than the careful omissions that had characterized our interactions for so long. After everyone had left and my parents had gone to bed, I sat alone in the backyard where the ceremony had taken place, looking up at the stars and processing the magnitude of what had changed in a single afternoon. The secrecy that had isolated me from my family for years was finally broken, replaced by understanding and pride that felt both healing and overwhelming after so long carrying the burden of their disappointment. I thought about the colleagues who had become my chosen family during the years when my biological family couldn't understand my choices, and I felt grateful that I no longer had to choose between serving my country and maintaining honest relationships with the people who had raised me and shaped who I was before I discovered my calling in military service. The night air was cool and peaceful, carrying the ordinary sounds of suburban evening that contrasted sharply with the extraordinary events that had transformed our family gathering into something none of us would ever forget. I pulled out my phone and composed a message to my team lead, letting her know that my cover had been officially blown and my family now understood the nature of my service, information that would need to be documented and considered in future assignment planning. The response came quickly, congratulating me on the recognition I had received and expressing hope that the revelation would make future family relationships easier and more authentic than they had been during my years of classified service. As I prepared to go inside and try to sleep after the most emotionally significant day I had experienced since beginning my military career, I reflected on the unexpected gift of finally being seen and understood by the people whose opinions had always mattered most to me. The disappointment in their eyes had been replaced by respect and pride that felt like coming home after years of exile, even though I had never actually left. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and conversations as we all adjusted to this new reality, but tonight I could simply sit in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my two worlds had finally become one, and that the person my family saw when they looked at me finally matched the person I had worked so hard to become through my service to our nation. Sometimes the people closest to us see only what they expect to see, missing the courage and dedication that might be hidden beneath the surface of lives that don't follow conventional paths. What hidden strengths do you carry that others don't recognize? What service are you providing that goes unnoticed by the people who matter most to you? Share your story below, because sometimes the most important recognition comes from knowing that others understand the weight of serving something larger than ourselves, even when that service requires sacrifices that the people we love most can't see or comprehend.